For those who say it gets easier day by day when a young person dies, it does not. In some ways, it gets harder. When we finally start functioning, we have learned to live with an unimaginable hole, emptiness, pain. not it has gotten better. We look in the mirror and see a different human. Without warning, our old self was emptied, and in a process that we have no choice about, we change in an instant, in a flash, in a snapshot. The fullness of the transformation takes years. However, the wound is always open and always bleeding. I know that those who love us want to believe that it isn't, that it heals. I cannot ease your worry that way. It is pain that we live with forever, on all days. Yes, we keep moving forward, and we become willingly or kicking and screaming our next incarnation. But we never move on. It doesn't get easier day by day. We just learn to live with the pain. Yes, someday we feel joy again, and we have purpose again, and we continue on. Maybe we even lead vibrant lives, but this stays with us until our departure from the physical world. The only gripe I have when people try to help is the unwillingness to hear that, to accept that. We are members of a club that we never wanted to be members of. And unless you are a member, you cannot imagine what that club is. And I hope you never have to. So please, when someone says that they don't know how they will live with this forever, know it is forever that they will have to live with it. I know because I am a member of this club twice over now. Hear the grief. Leave your beliefs at the door and be present with them and theirs. Meet them where they are at, not where you want them to be. Grief doesn't work like that. It's not linear. It is all over the place, and it is forever.
feel the same way?
Yeah, I'm just a simple kid who just likes skateboarding. What do I do here? I run. Can I say that?
Yeah, that's like, yeah, exactly.
Wait, for the TV I can say.
Skateboarding is a sport, an activity, and a lifestyle that connects all different kinds of people. Skateboarding does this on a global scale and on a smaller one as well. Take Vermont, the Green Mountain State, one of the most rural states in the country. Skateboarding has flourished here, connecting people and growing communities.
The skate scene in Vermont is, for being how small of a place Vermont is geographically and population-wise, it's very small compared to other large cities and states. But the scene here for skateboarding is top rate. It's peak. It's amazing. Very strong community, and there's tons of skaters. A lot of people skateboard here. I don't know if it's just people feed off each other's passion. You know, we have some street spots. They're not all great, but people are out there hustling, getting tricks, encouraging others to join them, and just really a lot of motivated people. It's really cool to be a part of that and be able to feed off of that.
I moved to Vermont in '97, roughly, and straight to Burlington, which Burlington is a great example of a Vermont skate town. Amazingly talented kids. When I was living there, they didn't have a skate park. And they were just pushing and trying to get funds raised for years and years and years. They just actually got the park that they've deserved for 20 years. So I came right into Burlington, which is a great skate scene. A lot of people from the cities, but just real thriving. Street skating, you know, indoor minis, very cool scene. I then moved down south and moved to Ludlow, Vermont, which was real kind of, you know, country skating. The park was almost DIY, but, you know, just kind of sharp edges, rough cement, and they still had a great scene. And that's kind of when I realized that, you know, Vermont isn't full of good parks, but all it takes is even a bad park and you can grow a community. And I'm not saying Ludlow's a bad park, it's a good park. I went from there to Manchester, where you see, or I'm sorry, Stratton, where you see the Manchester crew. You see the Rutland crew. So there were about 5 different little hubs in Vermont. And you know, it's a small state. People travel, skaters know where other skate parks are. So we have all tied in really well together. Probably more coherently than most other states, I would have to say. But, you know, it's not big city skaters. It's people that, you know, really appreciate what they have, work with what they have. So it's kind of a cool, laid back, no glamour, really hardworking skaters, skaters that are willing to talk to you, skaters that are interested in where you're from. So it becomes a really small, tight-knit community very quickly. You know, I'd say Burlington is, you know, a little farther out from the central Vermont spots, but every little hub is within an hour-and-a-half drive, so it's easy to tie all together.
I feel that the skate scene in Vermont, or Rutland, Lebanon, Burlington, is strong. I mean, one, you've got a population base to help support it, so which is great. So because they support it, it allows the rural area kids to have a place to go. Whereas if you didn't have the larger community supporting something like that, then it would fall apart, and then kids that are in the woods, so to speak, or in the smaller towns just would have to make do on their own somehow if they had that drive, which some certainly do. I mean, I have friends that You know, I was speaking to one the other day. He's like, oh, I still have my mini ramp in my mom's barn because he lived in rural Vermont. And yeah, he would make it down to Leb or wherever, but if he wanted to skate, that's what he had to do. And I really feel strongly that having these communities invest in the skate parks makes kids like that take the risk to do something at home. And that just grows the sport and grows the spirit.
From the first time I moved here, the kids that I saw skating, it kind of blew me away. You know, there was always a really tight-knit, really good group of people who were very focused on learning, progressing, filming, and creating content.
I mean, like, really, there is actually a really tight community of skateboarding energy around here that's built up from us building things together, us meeting up in different ways, because it's great. Like, the way this community is building, it's grabbing people from, like, up to an hour away for drives and stuff. It's coming together really well. I mean, the community was built by my friends who I met at other skate parks, helping me go after my goal and helping me conquer my goal with from my friend Charles helping me do the masonry to all my friends like Pierre, Josh, all these other dudes helping us do masonry on the time that we put down 1,059 bags of concrete to build this place. And then, for example, Adam, who I met through Plaza 2, he's a great artist and everything, does great editing and everything. I mean, he did our hat design. And then I have my friend John, who did our board design. So the community is finally actually really being built here. It definitely is being built in the direction that a skateboarding community needs. And it's like, we have the artist, we have the filmer, we have the kid who's killing at skating, we have like the manager who's like trying to put everything together. We're finally building up to a pace that will be able to make the area of skateboarding and the kids in this community grow up to be able to be a lot more of a fun place for skating and getting together.
The Vermont skate scene is unstoppable. As many people as I see through talent and through the park here, I can still go down to the Burlington Skate Park right now and see about 40 skaters that I've never seen before in my life, and I know a lot of people in Vermont. We've spread though. We're not just the Vermont skate scene anymore, because we've got pros now that are living out in LA that grew up right here in that skate park from Barrie, Vermont and from Williston, Vermont. And we have our first pro skater was actually from Brattleboro, Vermont. A boy named Tino Razzo. I call him a boy, he's a man now. He was skating for Shutt back in the day. I think the Vermont skate scene is going to keep growing and getting bigger and bigger and better, especially with that beautiful park, the Andy A. Dog Williams Skate Park on the waterfront, which is an absolute treasure for our community, in Andy's name especially. People are down there every day learning new stuff, getting more comfortable, getting better, filming each other, and it gets out there in the universe, and the Vermont skate scene just keeps growing with it. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
The weather in Vermont can be one of the most challenging aspects of skateboarding. With an average of only 157 days of the year that have sun, and even fewer days with warm weather, you kind of just have to battle through it.
So the people that do skateboard through those type of conditions, they almost have like a higher awareness of how to deal with those elements. We're not blessed to be in Southern California and have perfect weather every single day you wake up. Here, it's like, is it nice today? Is it crappy? I'm still gonna go out and skate. Having a resource like an indoor park in Vermont, it's huge. Like, I mean, snowboarding's fun and everything. I'll skate.
So what Flipside gives to Vermont that's very important when you think of the weather in New England and all that is we have an indoor skate park that's obviously open to anybody, very affordable. And you know, our sessions, we don't have session times. You come in to skate, you can skate all day as long as we're open.
Talent was always there in the winters for like the 7 months out of the year that snow in Vermont. Talent's always been there in the winters, especially when you don't want to wait an hour and a half for your toes to get warm skating in a parking garage. So you can come to Talent and just skate your heart out, just get out of school and come here. Maybe do a little homework, but just constantly wanting to skate. And this place was a great outlet for it.
Talent fits into the Vermont skate scene in a number of different ways. I think the most obvious is we're a place for people to skate when the weather isn't cooperating. Deeper than that, I think, is just growing the skate scene with skate camps. You know, just taking kids and bringing them in and like here, this is skateboarding, and like, you know, maybe candy coating it a little bit. You know, when I was a kid, you know, you learned by getting heckled. You know, you kind of got hazed, like if do this or you know we're gonna make fun of you type of thing. And we sort of have a little bit more of a nurturing environment, like trying, hey, you can do this.
Sometimes when the snow is falling and you don't have access to an indoor park, you just have to bust out the shovel and squeegee and start getting to work. A lot of skaters have that attitude up in Vermont. If you want to skate, well, you have to take the shovel and battle Mother Nature yourself. But the snow also brings a migration of skaters as well.
There are people that come to work at the mountain in the winter time that help the community thrive as far as skateboarders go, because they come from a different place in the world with a different attitude, and they go hard when everything's shutting down here. They're not typically here in the summertime. So when everything starts to change and the weather starts getting cold is when they start coming to the park, because they start working at the mountain. And I'll tell you one thing, frontside grabs off the coping is Mateus Corral. You know, there was a guy on a Christmas day, I was skating in shorts. They came walking in, and I had such love when he walked into the park that I thought that I knew him, and I waved to him. But as he came closer, he actually gave me a hug, and I was taken back by it. But only after skating with him for a short while, he was pulling off the coping when he was down, and now that's something that I am like right on doing too. I love it. So.
Skating means something different to every skateboarder, but every skater loves skateboarding. They remember their first board, their first trick, and the battles and hardships of trying to land a trick, and the euphoric experience of finally landing it.
When I was a kid, I grew up in Massachusetts, and there was Lakeview BMX. It was a BMX track in Lunenburg, and that was the next town over from me, and every kid in my town had a BMX bike, and BMX was huge. There was a pro BMXer who lived in my town, and we were all kind of into that. And then Lakeview closed, and BMX kind of started to fall off, and my friend Jonathan got a skateboard. John Hobbs, he ollied his skateboard down 3 stairs in front of Kirk McCrae's house, and it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, and I just wanted to skateboard after that.
What keeps me skating is the constant challenge of learning new tricks and keeping up with the tricks that you had learned before. And not only that, but meeting new people and like reuniting with old friends, just skating together. Like everyone's trying to have a positive attitude, learn something new, or push each other to do something greater than what we've done before. And that goes anywhere you are. You know, I could go to Canada or Mexico or China or whatever, and you bring your skateboard. You can meet new people, and they can push you to try new things that you've never done before, never thought of before. And that's what really kind of makes me stick with skateboarding, because it fits wherever I go.
The competitions that we have is a good window into how the community gets along, because the competition isn't like a lot of other sports competitions. Sure, people want to win, but it's all about showcasing what you've been working on and watching other people perform the skills that they've been working on. It's more of a celebration than a competition. And that's another reason that I've always loved the skateboarding community, because everybody backs everybody in these. If somebody does something great at a competition, everybody goes crazy. It's not like one home team against another home team. You're all there for the same reason. You're all there to get stoked on skating. If somebody does something awesome, it just gets everybody stoked.
And I remember what it's like to be a teenager and how lost you could be. So a skateboard is like a universal passport. You can go anywhere in the world with a skateboard. You don't even have to speak the language. You can just have the skateboard and you're doing similar tricks. Or even if you're an old guy like me, an old bro, you know, they see you carving and they get stoked just seeing that. And I do stuff that all the time that I don't really even think I could do anymore. And it's only because of the people that are around me. Some of the things that skateboarding represents is surfing, and that was big for me growing up on Long Island and having a father, you know, that was a lifeguard in the summertime, or a swim instructor in the summertime, but a teacher in the you know, during the year, and just what it means to be a surfer or a skateboarder, or it does give you an identity. And you can see now, going back to the autobiographies that are happening with Dogtown or the Bones Brigade, each of those people had an identity because of the time and place that they grew up in. So that also goes back to the passport thing. It's like, not only do you bring your geographic location and your personality, but you bring along what happened in that snapshot of time as you go from one place to another, because I've revisited something that I put away for 30 years. You know, and it's given me a whole new identity at 54 years old.
Learning a trick in skateboarding, it's even more intense. I've played a lot of sports in my life, but learning a trick in skateboarding is way more intense. And it's more intense because you're bringing in the fear factor and the difficulty. The nuances of a skateboard trick are so minuscule. The littlest thing can throw it off, and the littlest thing can send you on the ground, and it hurts. But when you practice something again and again and again, and then it finally clicks, just everything comes together. And the noise that it makes, I mean, when you land a trick, the noise that it makes sounds different than every other time. And you're rolling away, and the relief that you're on your board, it's an incredible feeling. It's not like anything I've felt in any other sport.
Because skateboarding is such a self-motivated thing. Nobody's telling you to, you know, grind more stairs, or, you know, nobody's kind of your coach. That's the beautiful thing about it, is it really comes from within. If you have a drive to do something, there's nothing stopping you. And skateboarding has really taught me that I can do things that I thought were impossible. So if you can transfer that into living life, things that you think are impossible might not be. It's incredible. That has been monumental, and I think the community kind of feels that way. A lot of skateboarders have a different mindset. They're a little more self-motivated. People start businesses that are skaters. People are a little more artistic, maybe musical. And people are successful because they know how to use their brain. They know how to learn something on their own without having to get a degree or having to go through other traditional routes of learning. You can teach yourself anything. Skateboarding has taught me that. It's incredible.
Skate shops have always been a place that reflect local skate scenes and have been an inner sanctum for the local skaters. Vermont skate shops are no different. They reflect community involvement and inclusiveness.
What makes a good skate shop is having something for everybody, whether it's, you know, an old school bowl skater, a 20-something, you know, no comply skater, a 15-year-old stair skater, or a 5-year-old buying their first board. You want to have something for everybody.
A lot of people think you open up a business to make a lot of money, but I've realized being in the skateboard and snowboard industry for the past couple years that you kind of open your store to create a community and culture, not so much make millions of dollars off of them. You know, you bring all this equipment in and you sell it for just kind of to get by. You know, a skateboard deck costs you $50 and it might cost us just a little bit less than that. And we're here to help people get on board and create a lifelong passion for something that we are so passionate about. And in the long run, we make a lot of friends and they all come back and we all have a great time.
The skateboard shop has always been a hangout. I mean, I've been working in skateboard shops since, you know, the early 90s, and you always had a couch, you always had a VCR or a DVD player. There was always kids hanging out, watching DVDs, watching movies, reading the magazines, and that's what it was always about. People would go to the skate shop, meet up, and then go skate. They'd go skate, then come back and meet up at the skate shop, you know? It was always an integral part of skateboard culture, for sure.
The atmosphere is it's great because it's building. I mean, like these kids, like with all the booths and all, being able to hang out and skate and just meet up with their friends here, it is building a nice hometown skate shop appeal again. And that is actually something that's really starting to die off, I think. I think the internet sales and everything like that are almost burning up shops nowadays.
There is a looming crisis that Vermont and other skate shops are facing across the country.
Retail in general is in trouble because everyone is shopping online. We have kids who will come in, they'll get fitted for everything, sneakers, helmet, and then they leave with nothing. They're gonna go home and price it out on Amazon, and it sucks. Because even if they gave us the opportunity, I would do my best to match it. Obviously, I want people to support their local skate shop. We're not going to be here if people don't support their local skate shop. It's a pretty frustrating time as a retailer. And even when you're providing the best that you can buy, the hottest thing on Instagram, people are still shopping online. Not everybody, but a majority.
Hey, people are going to, if we have the product that a customer wants at a price they're willing to pay, generally they'll come here and buy it. If our price is too high or if we don't have what they're looking for, they're going to go online. But it is important to shop local. Whether it's here, whether it's another, buy from a local skate shop. Just buy from a local skate shop. Doesn't matter what shop it is, just buy from the local skate shop if you can, if at all possible.
I had a father. It was the second week of camp I had his son. I knew everything. I knew what he ate for his lunch. I knew when he didn't eat his lunch. I knew when he didn't sleep well the night before. I knew what tricks he was working on, and I knew what tricks he learned. Dad came in, it was Wednesday of his second week, and dropped off at break a pair of sneakers that he had bought the kid online that had just shown up in the mail. I thought he had taken a knife and stabbed me in the chest. And it was all I could do to refrain from bawling my eyes out. Because he walked in here every day past my shoe wall. And it wasn't even a price thing because he didn't even stop and look. It was just the convenience of it. That is what's going to put every skate shop, park out of business.
Unfortunately, Talent and Plaza have closed their doors for good, leaving the communities they were a part of with a piece of their soul missing.
I mean, the difference between running a skate shop now and 12, 15 years ago is 100% the internet. Skaters, 15 years ago, you came to the skate shop to get information about skateboarding, whether it was to buy a skateboard magazine, whether it was to buy a skateboard video, just to see the latest decks, see the latest shoes. The skate shop isn't as important now as it was then because you can buy all those products, see all those products, watch all those videos, and read all that editorial content all online. So the skateboard shop is definitely not as important as it used to be, for better or for worse. That's it's just the facts.
But skating communities will always come together and rebuild. It will not accept not having a place to go.
But all it takes is a park, and you can grow a community.
The story of Flipside began when Zero Gravity announced that they were leaving. The town just wanted to build a couple ramps and stick them in a park. And there was such a big swelling of people that were not going to deal with that meetings were packed. There was people out the door. Committees were made, money was raised. It was a grassroots effort. I mean, you hear that all the time, but this really was a grassroots effort. Everybody came together and wanted a park that was just as good or better than Zero Gravity. And Zero Gravity had tons of people coming here all the time. It was a big park. It was definitely well known throughout New England, and so it was a big shoes to fill to replace a park of that magnitude.
We left, and the community was not going to be without a skate park. That was clear from everybody we talked from the minute we decided that this was the right decision, was to leave. As hard as it was to do, to leave behind, you know, hundreds of friends and families, you know, just was the right decision. And flip side came about because all these people were not going to not have a place to go.
It was almost like a perfect storm. You had a lot of support for a new skate park here. You also had money. I mean, the money that we raised for Flipside was not a lot of money, but it was a lot of money for this area. And we had Chris Herka. We had somebody here in town that was capable of building this type of park. 3 bids went out for this park, and 2 of them were well over $200,000. And the money that was raised was only about $80,000. So when Chris Herka came in and said he could build it for around $90,000, that's what really got the ball rolling. And he built everything right here, right in the park, which also was an awesome aspect of it because I didn't know a ton about skate parks at the time, but there was kids skating here every day. So every time we had a question about a ramp or how we should set something up, we could either draw out a diagram or show them a transition, have 10 kids look at it and tell us exactly what they wanted. So it wasn't just input from a few builders, it was input all the kids that were riding.
So we give a tradition, a history to skating in Vermont. You know, we let people know that if you stick it out, if you're into it, you know, it doesn't matter what's happening in skating worldwide or statewide. We have a scene, we've kept the scene going. We've kept it going for years and years and years. So I think, you know, it's almost like we give hope to skating, and we just kind of show that the tradition of skating hasn't died. You know, this is a long-running park, and we're going to keep it going.
Skaters always see each other as equal. We can walk a mile in someone else's shoes. It's never mattered who you are or where you come from. As long as you skate, you're part of the family.
It's like the unwritten rule to just be kind to each other. And I think skaters never forget when they were that kid. Remember when you were that kid? It sucked. It sucked, and you were scared, and you were worried. And then somebody smiled at you or told you, "Sick, dude!" And you were like, "I got this." And then you grew from there. I think skaters are so accepting. I think they're funny. There definitely is so much creativity within our skateboard family. It's just the best.
The equality in skateboarding really comes out. Skateboarding, everyone seems equal. We're all people. It breaks down those barriers of rich, poor, young, old. Just we're skateboarding together, and it breaks down those barriers that society tries to put up and keep us in. Unfortunately, I don't want to blame society or say all these nebulous terms, but it's really a true thing. I mean, as soon as you're in kindergarten, first grade, you're being labeled as a certain category of whatever, different ways. I don't want to elaborate on that too much, but skateboarding really just kind of like everyone's eye to eye. It's like, you know how much work it takes to get a kickflip under your feet. It's not like it just happens magically. You have to work for it. So I think that skateboarders kind of like, they understand each other even without ever meeting. You're a stranger in a town and there's a bunch of people skating, you're like, oh yeah, grab my board, start skating, like, hey, what's up? Everybody's saying hi, high fives. Like, you're just barely meeting these people, but you're instantly like friends kind of forever almost. It's crazy.
It's definitely, it's tough to talk about equality in skateboarding because when it comes down to it, skateboards cost money and not everybody has money or a family or friends that can support them enough to purchase their first skateboard. But in Vermont, the community is pretty tight, and when you go to a skate park, there are a lot of skaters that are willing to, you know, oh, you want to use my board? Like, that's chill. Like, I have like a spare board. Like, there's enough skaters here that you can kind of build like a support system within the skate community. And in that sense, there is a sort of equality amongst the skaters that are trying to, you know, promote the sport in a way that's not commercial.
Skateboarding definitely feels more compassionate than just being a normal person, but I haven't really been a normal person, but I can observe other people that don't skateboard. There's just more kind of angst, and everyone's kind of out to get their own little piece in society, and in general, we're almost taught that way. We're almost raised, schooled to be individualistic in the way that screw everybody else, I'm getting my piece. And in America too, to earn $1, you have to take it from somebody else, pretty much. But skateboarding just almost, skateboarding has an understanding, a bond that's way deeper than that. I mean, it's almost just everyone that skateboards is an independent-minded person in the way that we all care about each other. It's really weird concept that people can actually care about each other and have good feelings and help someone out when they need help. Like, somebody broke their board, I keep a bunch of extra spare boards in my trunk and happily would give that away in an instant, just so someone can keep going instead of, I don't know, damn.
When I think about skate parks, skating community, biking community, roller sports, that was one thing Zero Gravity had early on. Zero Gravity roller sports, because it was hard to say skate park. I mean, even that's what people call it, regardless of what you roll on. But there's so much value or equity in that equality of inviting everybody into one place and letting them express themselves. And the value of that is in the people that it creates or betters or gives someone an opportunity to see that acceptance, where maybe they came from a crappy home life, but they go to, or they have, they have a brother that's mean to them, but then they go to the skate park and they see these people all accepting them, and then that's okay, they can go home and deal with their brother a little differently.
Skateboarding in Vermont makes you appreciate every second you're pushing a skateboard, but it also makes you appreciate how community-oriented skateboarding is, and how skateboarders just interact with each other as humans, and they don't focus on the superficial things. The skate scene in Vermont is a perfect reflection on the skate scene in the world. Warm, welcoming, and open to everyone.
Acts 27. So as we get through the next 2 chapters, this is going to be all about the shipwreck that Paul's in. And I've labeled this, storms will come. Because for believers, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you're going to have some storms come in your life. And when they do, there's a purpose and there's a reason for them. God allows storms. And sometimes those storms are light rain. Sometimes it's just a refreshing time. And other times that storm is heavy with giant winds and lightning, and it's strong. And it brings pain, it brings suffering, it brings sorrow. And all by the hand of God. And when storms come, there's a storm in the nursery right now. So that's it. Yep. So when storms come, they come for a reason. And they're from the Lord for His children. They prove our faith. We have faith in each one of us. You know, scientifically, if I'm going to believe in Jesus Christ and I'm going to believe in God, and if I do it scientifically, then I will stumble in my faith. Because science will try to prove to me that you can't see God, you can't hear God, you can't taste God, you can't smell God. So scientifically, it can't be proven that He's God or that there is a God. And yet we are never called by God, we're never called to trust God scientifically. We are called by God to trust Him by faith, never by science. And that's how a lot of professors in colleges stumble young Christian men and women in their faith, because they try to scientifically prove to them how God can't be real. And yet every aspect of our Christian life is based on our faith in Jesus Christ, never our science. In fact, we've been through it many times, I'm sure, but in the book of Hebrews, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, and for by it the men of old gained approval. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible. And on the book of Hebrews teaches us it's by faith that men and women of God stepped into what God directed them to by faith. So when that aspect comes as believers, everything that we have based our Christianity upon is our faith in Jesus Christ. If you're waiting for feeling, stop. If you're waiting for an emotional experience, stop waiting. Take a step and start walking by faith in the promises of God's Word. And you'll begin to watch God actively move in your life. We're going to see that very strongly in Paul's life today as he faces a major storm in his life. Another storm. But this time he faces it as a prisoner of Christ. Whole different ballgame. He's able to face it strong. He's able to face it with maturity. He's able to face it making serious decisions on people's lives, because he's been through it many times. He understands what it is. I'm going to read to you from the book of Luke. You can just stay right in Acts if you want. I'm going to read the story of how, remember the song? Put your hand in the hand of the man who stilled the water. We're going to read that story. This is Jesus. It says, now on one of those days, Jesus and his disciples got into a boat, and he said to them, let's go over to the other side of the lake. So they launched out. But as they were sailing along, he fell asleep, and a fierce gale of wind descended upon the lake, and they began to be swamped and to be in danger. And they came to Jesus and woke him up, saying, Master, Master, we're perishing. And he got up and he rebuked the wind and the waves, and they stopped, and it became calm. And he turned and he said to them, where is your faith? They were fearfully amazed, saying to one another, who then is this that he commands even the winds and water that they obey him? Jesus turned to his disciples on this day, and he turned and he said to them, where's your faith? The storm came. I'm in the boat with you. You have nothing to fear. The storm came. Their eyes were fixed on the storm, and they became afraid of even perishing with their own life. And he turns and he says, where's your faith? Now these men had heard him teach the word of God boldly to people. They listened to him explain the parables to them. They watched him heal the sick. They watched him cast out demons from people. They watched the lame walk and the blind see. They watched him feed 5,000 people with 2 fishes and 5 small loaves. Yet he says to them, where's your faith? They still had no faith. They were still believing in him by what they could see, by what they could smell, by what they could hear, by what they could touch. They were still only believing in him scientifically. He turns and he says to them, where's your faith? And he's showing them that it's their unbelief, their lack of faith, that's caused them to fear the storm. And their fear actually made them question if Jesus really cared about them. You know, the sender of the storm is the savior of the storm. So when God sends a storm into your life, don't look up and curl up, or look out, curl up in a ball and cry out, why, God, why? Instead, or has your faith been proven by God yet? Have you allowed the storms into your life, Have you acknowledged that you have a Father in heaven who's in charge of every aspect of your life, every heartbeat of your life, every situation in your life? He's actively in charge of. So when a storm comes, you look up, you say, Lord, you're proving my faith. You're proving to me that I have expressed faith in your Son and trusting you. I'm not looking at this scientifically. I'm looking at the storm that you've sent into my life. When you learn to have your faith proven, when the storms come, your eyes will not be fixed on the storm anymore. They'll look past the storm and to the Savior of the storm, and you won't fear what the outcome's going to be. And then it won't be fear driving your life or fear having you make decisions. You're making decisions based upon your Savior who your eyes are fixed on. Really important. That's why the Word of God tells us we're to be aware or to beware of an evil heart of unbelief. Because all true faith in the heart of any believer must be put to the test by God so that faith can be proven. Faith has to be proven before God can build upon it. That provenness is a sure foundation. If you're a builder here and you're going to build a building on a foundation that's rickety and not plumbed correctly, why would you build the building in the first place? What's it going to do? Over time, it's going to fall down. It's going to tip to one side or cave in, and all that beautiful work's going to be damaged. The proving of my faith is the sure foundation of Christ in my life that God will then build His glory upon. And Paul, we've been looking at his life very deeply, has learned that lesson well over many years of storms in his life. And now as a prisoner of Christ, he's going to face one of the biggest ones he's ever faced in his whole lifetime, and he's going to come through it for the glory of God. And we're going to watch that happen. In Acts chapter 27, we're going to look at the difference between God's counsel and man's counsel, because we're going to see how that turns out. In verse 1, so when it was decided that we would set sail for Italy, they proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. So you know what's happened. We've already seen that Paul stood before Festus. He stood before Agrippa. They found him innocent. He's not guilty of anything, yet he appealed to go to Caesar. So off to Caesar he's going to go. So some time has passed. He's been in prison in Caesarea. They're going to now ship him off to Rome, and he's shipped off to Rome with other people. It says, it was decided that we would set sail for Italy. Well, who's we? Well, Luke is with Paul. He's the one writing the book of Acts. And Aristarchus is with Paul. He's a traveling companion that just stood by Paul's side, been with him for 2 years in Caesarea, and now he's going to travel with him as a prisoner to Rome. Now, as Paul's heading to Rome as a prisoner, it says that there's some other prisoners that are with him too. Those prisoners are the ones that are chained up. Paul's not chained up. Paul's been given innocence by Agrippa. So he's not going as a captive prisoner. He's going as a prisoner, I guess, of suggestion. Well, you appeal to Caesar, so to Caesar you go. You're still under the authority of Festus because you appealed to him. So, but he was free to move about and do as he pleased. We're going to see that as they settle in a couple different ports, he's given freedom to go visit some friends and come back. So he's under this kind of freedom that he's with, and he has friends that are with him. That would be Luke and Aristarchus. It says that they were put under the command of a centurion, Augustus, the Augustan cohort named Julius. The Augustan cohort, they had a name called the Fermentari, and they were a group of like imperially commissioned, specially selected men by Caesar. What Caesar would do is he would pick specific centurion men who would oversee 100 people. He would find men of high integrity, men of high quality, high character, and they would be set apart to go out into all the distant lands and the Roman colonies and to go in and just check on different things. Like your state health inspector would show up and say, I'm just here to check the health inspection of this building. They would go in and they would check things. They would go into a business district. They would check all the businesses. They had the authority from Caesar to walk in anytime they wanted to and say, okay, I want to open up your books and see that your figures are right, that you're not ripping anybody off. They would go to the bankers and they would sit down in the banks and they would say, okay, and they had authority over all businesses, over all things. They could keep the Roman society, the Roman economic system going. They were men of high integrity. So that's who this guy Julius is. And Paul and some other prisoners are placed in his care to go off to Rome. In verse 2. And they embarked on an Adriatic ship which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia. So just a Roman ship that's heading off that way. We put out to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, verse 3. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go visit his friends and receive care. From there we put out to sea and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. When we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed in Myra and Lycia, and there the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us on board it. So they're traveling around. They get down to Cilicia and Sardis. They just get to this Pamphylia. Lydia, when they get there, they get off the ship they're on because it's not traveling anymore towards Rome, and they see this Alexandrian ship. Now, an Alexandrian ship is this huge ship. It's about 200, maybe 230 feet long, and it's a grain freighter, which means it's not a regular ship like a Roman ship that's got 10 sails on it and it can sail in all different directions. It's got one sail, and it's a giant grain freighter. That means it moves really slowly along, but it gets to where it's going. It's not anything that's built for heavy seas. It's not anything that's built to go in any direction. It goes one way. Where the way the wind's blowing is the way they go. That's a grain freighter. It just slowly moves along. So they get on this Alexandrian ship. Verse 7, when we had sailed slowly for a good many days with difficulty, we had arrived off Sindus. Since the wind did not permit us to go further, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salome, and with difficulty sailing past it, we came to a place called Fair Havens, which was the city of Lascelles. So the ship was just moving along real slow. If the wind died down, you just sat there until the wind kicked back up. If the wind was blowing fast, you just kind of still moved along real slow because you only had one big sail. So they just, God's not rushing to get Paul to Rome. This is Paul. He's with his friends. All this stuff's going on. They're changing the ship here. They're going to this place, that place, the other place. I just think of, if I'm going to pack up and go to Rome, I'm going to pack up and go to Rome. It reminds me of shopping. When I go shopping to get what I want to get, guess what I do? I get what I want to get, and I get out of the store as fast as I can. When my wife goes shopping to get what she wants to get, we're there for a couple hours because we roam around all the different ports and I'm going out of my mind because I'm like, I just get what we need to get and get out of here. And so here's Paul. He's a prisoner of Christ. He's under the direction of the Lord. He's in the providence of God. He's under the sovereignty of God. He understands he's going to Rome, and it doesn't matter to him if he gets there tomorrow or 10 years from now. Because he understands that the journey is part of the pilgrimage. He understands that as God is bringing me along, if he doesn't accomplish what I think he needs to accomplish in my life tomorrow, I'm settled with that. I'm okay with that. He can accomplish whatever he wants in my life because I'm yielded to him to do that. And along the way, I get to teach his word. Along the way, I get to share his love with people. On the way, I get to hand him out to everybody I know. And that's the life. That's the true life of every believer. If I'm in this world for my retirement, I'm in this world for the wrong direction. If I get it, praise God. If I don't, praise God. Because I'm in this world to share his love with people. I'm in this world to teach his word. We have a whole group. We have pastors here. In this world to praise the Lord and to lead a fellowship to sing praises to him. We're in this world. We serve a community. We make dinners for people. We talk to them about God's love for them. As simple as that. That's the journey. And if we don't get to where we think we need to be with him tomorrow, what's that to us? The journey is part of the pilgrimage. That's part of the walk. That's what most Christians get tripped up in. That's where we can bring all kinds of programs into the church and all kinds of options and all kinds of opinions into the church and make it work the way we think it ought to work so everybody feels good today. And you know what we've done? We've tossed aside the leading of the Holy Spirit. We've stopped God from allowing a storm to come in and toss us up out of our comfort zone. We've pushed God aside when we do that. But to walk in his sovereignty along according to his providence in his will means things are going to happen that are different than I think it should be. I may end up at this port here and jump on ship and end up at that port there and this port here and change ships over there along the way. And you know something? I'm wholly and completely in the will of God while that's happening. And this is what Paul's part of as he's going. We get down to verse 9. When a considerable time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over, Paul began admonishing them. That's the men. And he said to them, Men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo and of the ship, but also of our lives. He kind of sticks in. So what Luke is recording this, he says, when a considerable amount of time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous. So what's happening here is it means literally it was sailing against the wind. Now, an Adriatic ship doesn't sail against the wind. You need 2 or 3 sails to be able to face one against the wind and turn the others so that you can run against the wind. But one big sail means you're just getting pushed backwards. And you don't steer a ship backwards. That's how you capsize. So they're running against the wind. Means they're going nowhere fast. Many days have passed. They're going nowhere fast. If you're a Christian, does that feel like your life sometimes? You're like, here I am, Lord, I'm serving you. Many days have passed and I'm going nowhere fast. And God's like, you're on an Adriatic ship against the wind. Don't worry about it. Sometimes it feels that way. Sometimes it is that way. But you know what? And it is that way in my life in many areas, sometimes. But I know who's in charge of my life. I know who my heart belongs to. I know who's the grand master of my life, and by his providence, he will work out what he wants in me and through me according to his will. So if in my life it feels like I'm going nowhere fast, I don't worry about that anymore. I can just trust him for it. And that's where they're at here in a powerful way. just like going nowhere fast. Also, the crew would have been exhausted because they would have been fighting the sail for many days. Not many daytimes, many 24-hour periods. So for many days, 24 hours, you get a crew, it's probably a like a 12-hour shift. And they're working nonstop, round the clock. They're all on. They're all fighting the sail, holding the ship so it doesn't back up and flip over. And they're probably really tired and exhausted. It says, when the fast was over, Paul began to admonish them. Now the fast would have been the Jewish Day of Atonement. That would have been the time frame. On the Jewish Day of Atonement, any Jew, wherever he was across the whole world, would stop and fast that day from all things, from labor, from work, from reading, from anything. They wouldn't do anything. On the Day of Atonement, you stop, you do nothing, you fast from everything. So he says, when the fast was over, so it was pretty clear that they're fighting, the sailors are battling with the wind, they're going against the wind, and it's the Day of Atonement, so Paul and Luke and Aristarchus and whoever else would be Jewish would have fasted that day. After the fast was over, it says Paul began to admonish them. Now this admonishment here, very important, means to instruct with mild reproof. Literally, to teach through experience. He began to speak. You know, we're told in 2 Thessalonians 3 to count someone not as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother. Speak through experience. It's great when someone's faced some really tough things in their life and they've learned to trust the Lord through them. You can get great encouragement from them, great admonishment from them when they begin to share with you how to trust God through this trial, because you can gain from experience. We're also told in Colossians chapter 3 to admonish one another in psalms and in hymns and in spiritual songs. So Paul admonishes them. And what he says to them in verse 10, men, I perceive the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. That's a heavy thing to say. You've been battling sails for days. You're exhausted, you're tired, you're hungry. And then you get admonished. This guy Paul steps in. Who's he? I got a captain. There's also a man from the Augustus cohort here. Who are you? You're a prisoner. That's what they're looking at. And this is Paul steps up. I perceive, it'd be like slap that guy with a fish, something. But his statement here, I perceive, it means to understand from previous experience. Paul opens up his mouth. He doesn't go like this. I perceive. He doesn't do that. What he does, he stands up and he's like, listen, I understand. All right, you guys are men of the sea, you're sailors. But I understand something right now from previous experience. I've been in storms before. Okay? I've been through and I've learned how to face dangers. I know what dangers are ahead. Paul has already written 10 years before to the church in Corinth. He says, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. He wrote this 10 years before this. 3 times I was shipwrecked. In dangers from waters, in dangers from robbers. I've spent a day and a night in the deep. We never read about when that happened to him, because he wrote that 10 years before this experience. So he's telling them something. He's saying, listen, I'm looking at the storm. I'm watching you're exhausted. I'm looking at the type of ship we're on. And there's something I understand here. You keep fighting against this wind, and this ship's going to be damaged. And that cargo's going to be lost. And our lives are going to be lost. And I'll tell you, there's a truth in that. As a Christian, if I'm fighting against the wind, if I'm fighting against the storm that God's allowed in my life, I'll tell you, it's going to damage the ship I'm on. It's going to damage my walk with Him. It's going to damage, I'm going to lose cargo. May even lose my life and die earlier than I should have. There are many things in that, lessons for us deep in this. You don't fight against the wind. You let the captain of your ship, who knows how to handle the sails, you let the captain of your ship direct you where you're going. And if you find that you're heading somewhere and it's contrary to where God wants you, He'll just blow a storm in, so that you have to trust Him by faith and let go of the oars or let go of the helm. Let Him take over. So Paul gives this example to these men. Hey, I've been down this road before many times. I've been shipwrecked. And I think out of all the wrecks in the world, you got car wrecks, you got plane wrecks, you got building wrecks, and they're all tragic. But I think the worst wreck of all would be a shipwreck for me. Because maybe in a car wreck I'd get killed. Maybe in a train wreck I'd get busted up. Maybe in a plane wreck I wouldn't live. But in a shipwreck, I may be a night and day in the deep. I wouldn't want to do that. There's things in the water that will eat you. I would rather be in a wreck and die, honestly, than to be in a shipwreck and float and wait for something to eat me before somebody came to pick me up. That would be a great fear of mine. So they're in this wreck. Paul's like, I've been in wrecks, okay? I'm watching where we're going here. I've been down this road. Be careful. We're gonna hit the wrong way. Verse 11. But the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than of what was being said by Paul. Because the harbor was not suitable for wintering, the majority reached a decision to put out to sea from there, if somehow they could reach Phoenix, which was a harbor of Crete, facing southwest and northwest, and to spend winter there. So they're at this place. The centurion was more persuaded. There was a greater conviction of the influence of authority than there was of the influence of God's plan. See, this is the difference between God's plan and man's plan. Man's plan loves the authority of man. Well, this guy's a captain and you're a slave. So, I'm going to listen to the captain who knows greater than the slave. Really? Be careful. I remember one time my mom and dad had a trailer that were moving, and this truck driver pulled up with the trailer, and he pulls up to come into my driveway, and we stop. We say, listen, you can't make the corner. So if you drive down the road about half a mile, there's a town hall. You can turn around, come in, and make the corner beautifully. Was the guy say, don't tell me how to drive. Get out of my way. Right? What did he do? He got stuck for 5 hours. Had to get a tow haul in and get him. He couldn't get out of there. And like, sorry, man. I'm just a peon little nothing, right? That doesn't know anything. But be careful. Been down that road before. So experience is speaking, but it's Paul speaking. And we know that the experience that he's faced, whether he was shipwrecked before, he was, and spent the night and day in the deep, it was by the hand of God. So the experience that's being spoken here is his experience in serving the Lord, in serving God. I perceive that we're going to face some real tough times. Well, I'd rather take the advice of the captain than you, because he has a greater influence in my life. So they pack up and they move on. It says, because the harbor, verse 12, was not suitable for wintering. That means it wasn't prepped and ready for them to pull in there for the winter. They reached a decision to pull out to sea from there, thinking somehow they could reach Phoenix, which was a harbor of Crete, facing southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Verse 13, when a moderate south wind came up, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete, close inshore. So this moderate wind comes up. Literally, it means a warm, comfortable, gentle, soft wind. It's everything we've been looking for. Even though it's February, Indian summer, be careful, everybody knows. Yeah, they see this warm comfort comes in. That's what we've been looking for. I've been looking, the guys are exhausted, they've been battling against the wind. They've been fighting this whole time. Then I got Paul over saying, everyone's going to die. No, I've been waiting for this warm, soft, gentle breeze. This is the route we're going to take. And they take off and they head down to it. It's almost like they had seized their great opportunity to grab hold of this soft wind. It is kind of tough because That's what we look for, isn't it? We're in the midst of a storm where the human heart wants to get out of it. I'm tired. It's cold. It's hard. I'm fighting against the wind. The weight's too much. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm waiting for some soft, gentle breeze to come blowing my way and just scoop me. Calgon, take me away. You know, just off I go. And that's what we wait. That God's like, that's not what you wait for. Look past the storm. Into my eyes, God would say. Look past the storm into where I'm going with you. You may find out that I'm doing exactly what I want. That maybe I know you're strong enough, if you trust me, to face this storm. Maybe there's something in you I'm going to prove. Maybe there's something in those around you I'm going to prove. But you're my servant. You're my prisoner. The storm is for me. And so they see this soft, gentle breeze and they take it. They jump on it. You know, I look at this and it's like, you know, how do I know the will of God against my own will? When you're facing a situation in your life and you say, Lord, how do I know what your will is here? And how do I know what my will is here? You know, when life throws difficulties your way, just look at what these men on the ship faced and how they dealt with what was before them. First of all, the men on the ship were impatient. They didn't want to wait. They wanted to get on with their journey. And to you and I, you know, no waiting on the Lord is as hard as it may be in the difficulties of life. Wait on Him. As hard as it may be, wait on Him. You know, God takes pleasure when I am trusting Him by faith, but there is no pleasure. It doesn't please Him when I'm trusting myself and I have to see how it's going to end before I take a step. Or I have to force it so it works out my way. And God's saying, trust me by faith. Look at where I've brought you so far. I've not let you go. I've kept you. You're alive, you're active, you're in my care, you have eternity laid at your feet, and you've grabbed hold of it. It is my hand that's kept you. It is my hand that's held you. And I will not let you go. Trust me by faith. And it's that faith, that step of faith, and trusting Him, that pleases God. We're told without faith it's impossible to please God. I have to believe by faith He is who He is before anything even begins. And there's a picture there painted for us, a very strong one. The men on the ship couldn't take it. Let's keep going. Verse 14, I think. But before long, there rushed down from the land a violent wind called Araquello, which was a nor'eastern. And when the ship was caught in it, we could not face the wind, and we gave in to it, and let ourselves be driven along, running under the shelter of a small island called Claudia, where we know where she came from now. And we were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. So you have this nor'eastern come in. It's not like a hurricane. This storm is going to drive this ship about 500 miles away from their destination. And it's going to drive them, and we're going to see, for about 14 days. They're going to be exhausted more than they ever have been, fighting as hard as they can to stay alive. But this storm sent by God to show them a direction, to give them a direction, really. Running on verse 17. After they had hoisted it up, the ship, they were trying to get the ship under control, it says. So they used supporting cables and undergirding the ship, fearing that it might run aground in the shallows of Sardis. And they let down the sea anchor, and in this way let themselves be driven along. So what happens here is they're in the ship, they're afraid, this heavy wind comes in and a storm. That means the sky's black. There's no night, there's no day. They're running adrift, black, can't see anything. And as they're going along, they're afraid the ship's going to break up. So they take cables and they put them up, and that's how they support the ship. They tie it together. So a cable goes under the ship and goes around under the ship, goes around under the ship, and they tie that thing in tight so if it hits ground, it doesn't start breaking apart from the underneath. And that's what you do when you're in absolute fear that your ship is going to be destroyed. So they wrap this ship up with undergirding cables. They tie it up and they hold it in tight. They go down. They're running aground to. They were fearing that they might run aground on the shallows of Sardis. They let down the sea anchor there. This term, it means there was a shipyard grave, is what it means. The shallows of Sardis, it means the shipyard. It means that it was really shallow ground there, and during storms, ships would wreck, and that's where they were. So as they're going through, they're watching all the wrecks that are there. They can see them. And they're afraid they're going to get sucked right into it and be crashed themselves. So they undergird the ship, they tie it up, they're like, stay out of the shallows of Sardis because we're going to get caught up in here and get killed. So they can see, they're in fear of when the lightning would come up, they would know where they are. And they're in fear of not, they're in darkness, but they could see, and they're afraid. This is like unbelievable picture of a storm. You think about the last storm in your life that you were in. You can see, but you were blind. You can hear, but you can't hear. A way out. You're in there being tossed left and right. You're in fear. You're exhausted. You don't know what tomorrow holds. All you know is you don't want it to hold today. Just wish today would end and a fresh new day would start tomorrow. But that fresh new day never comes in those storms. They just keep coming, and it just keeps pressing in and pressing in. And that's what everybody's facing here very strongly in this shipwreck. It says, verse 18, the next day they were being violently storm-tossed. They began jettisoning the cargo. That means they're throwing over their grain. And on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. And since neither the sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small storm was assailing us, from then on all of our hope of being saved was gradually abandoned. When they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up in their midst. He says, men, you ought to have taken my advice, and followed my advice, not set sail to Crete and incur this damage and this loss. So what happens here is, they're there, and we know we're going to see it. It's 14 days. They've been in this storm 14 days. Not 14 days, daylight, 14 24-hour periods. They haven't eaten. They're exhausted more than they've ever been exhausted before. They're at a place where there's no hope. All their hope had run out. And what's amazing here is you got Luke and Aristarchus, who's traveling with Paul. Do you ever think, maybe this was the wrong traveling partner to be with? I'm in this storm. But you don't hear them complain. They left to serve the Lord with this man, which means they were solid believers. I think that's an awesome picture of what it means to be servant leaders or to be missionaries or servants of the Lord. You serve one another in love, and you don't pack up and leave when it doesn't go your way. So they're there for 14 days. There's going to be darkness, difficulty, disaster. And yet the whole time, what Paul understands is God's in charge. Now these men that are sailors, and they know the ocean, and this captain and this centurion, they don't understand that God's in charge of the storm. You may be here today, a believer. You may say, yes, Ron, I understand. God's really in charge of all the storms in my life. Yes, He is. And you may know that. You may know that well. But those around you may not know it. Those around you may not understand it. And when that storm hits in your life and you totally freak out and lose it, all you're showing them is that your trust in God's really not real. But in the midst of that storm, and you press on trusting Him by faith, you become a living example to them of what a follower of Jesus Christ really is. If you're going to turn the TV on and watch a Christian station to find out what a follower of Christ is, you're on the wrong road. You jump in a fellowship where Jesus Christ is Lord, where His Word is taught, where His children walk with Him through thick and thin, through difficulties, and don't pack up and run when something goes amiss. You'll see Christ in that fellowship. You'll see Him alive in His people. You'll see Him crystal clear of how He wants you to walk, how He wants you to trust, how He's there to see you through, how His grace is covering you, how His mercy is all over your life. And so these men are there, and they become this tremendous example to them. In verse 20, again, since neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small storm was assailing us, then from then on all hope of our being saved was gradually lost or gradually abandoned. What happened is the men of the ship lost their assurance that they were going to make it out of this. But not Paul, and not Luke, and not Aristarchus. There are 3 men amongst a whole 200 and something men, I think, total, on this ship that are trusting God, and they have an assurance that in spite of whatever happens, God is going to see us through. Even if I float for a day and a half in the deep where I don't want to be, He is going to see me through. And they had that assurance, and that assurance is going to begin to solidify these men. But these men that are on the ship, they don't have that assurance right now. So, when they trusted the counsel of the captain, the counsel of the pilot. It's a soft, warm breeze, exactly where we want to go. Let's follow it. Take off to sea. Don't forget, you're in a really big ship that's not made for heavy seas. Can't sail against the wind. Can only be driven by the wind or capsized by the wind. And then they get out there, and there's this storm of all storms. A storm like they'd never faced in their entire life. So much so that they would abandon all hope of being saved. When we trust in man's counsel, we never have the assurance of coming good through storms that the Lord has planned out for us. Because we will always be concerned about our own good, not God's good for us. And when you trust in God's counsel, the difference between the two, when you trust in God's counsel, you understand that you're there to face the storm yourself, to learn to stay protected by the hands of the Lord alone. And when it's over, the testimony of God's grace and mercy and care for your life will speak for itself and glorify God. And that's what's learned here. That's what you and I can learn from Paul's travels as he's facing the storm. You know what? What is your will here, Lord, for my life? Is it what man can tell me scientifically, weatherologically alive? Is it what man can show me on how to get out of this predicament? Or maybe, Lord, because you're my God whom I serve, maybe you've called me to face this predicament, to stand firm in this circumstance, to stand and endure through this storm, trusting you alone, so that my life's example can become an example to all that God's grace and mercy and care for my life is real. And if He would do that for this wretched sinner, He would do it for you in a heartbeat. Because He loves me, and I know by that love, He loves you. And He wants to see you through. So Paul's life became that, and Luke and Aristarchus too in the same way. In verse 21, when they had gone a long time without food, then Paul stood up in their midst and said, "Men, you ought to have followed my advice and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this damage and loss. Yet now I urge you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night an angel of the God whom I believe, whom I serve, whom I belong and whom I serve, stood before me, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you and all those who are sailing with you. Therefore keep up your courage, men, for I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on a certain island. So what happens here is these guys are in dire straits. I mean, they're all hope is gone. They're exhausted, they're hungry, they haven't eaten anything. They've thrown most of the cargo off the ship. All this grain that's just tossed in, they're just kind of waiting to die. Paul stands up in their midst and he takes charge. And it's an amazing thing because no one knew what was going on. He just steps up and takes charge. You know, when a crisis is happening, it's a crisis because someone's not in charge. And it's a crisis because those who are in charge are now freaking out because they don't know what to do. You just simply step up and take charge. And if you're a child of God, you have the authority in a crisis above all authorities there to stand up and take charge of the situation and bring them back to the Lord. That's what you do every time. I think of when 9/11 happened. In one of the buildings, there was a gentleman that was working in the World Trade Center, and he was part of a church, Calvary Chapel, in Lloyd Pulley Church in Old Bridge, New Jersey. And he had been working there for 25, 30 years. They used to call him Doc or something like that. They had a nickname for him. And he was a solid Christian, solid man of God. Led a Bible study in his house at the church. A solid man of God for years, many years. And he was in there when the planes crashed into the building. And he was above that, and everybody knew there was no hope. And they get on their cell. There's one guy on his cell phone, and he was talking to his wife. They have it recorded. And he said to his wife, I got to go. Doc's doing a Bible study right now. And they hung up, and they went inside. And he called his wife. He said, yep, we know there's no hope. I'll see you in heaven. I love you. And right now I'm leading people to Christ. So I got to go. Love you. Bye. Hung up. Led people to Jesus Christ. Let me tell you something. Is that not a crisis? There's no hope. You're on that floor. There's no hope below you. There's no hope above you. You got no hope. And what do? You're a man of God. You take charge. True story. And he stands up. He starts a Bible study. Brings people. Starts to share the gospel. People are receiving Christ as it's happening. And his wife, they're praying at the church, Lord, keep my husband alive. God gave her a word of knowledge. He said, your husband will be untouched. I promise you, your husband will be untouched. And as he's saying this to her, and as they're all praying, they're watching on TV, the building goes down. And the other building goes down. And they're all freaked out. And Lloyd Pulley, Pastor Lloyd, get up there. He's going to be teaching the men's conference when we go. They took off to go. They got to New York. They got, we're here to help. What can we do? And they're digging. They're looking for bodies. They find this one body amongst all the rubble that didn't have one mark on it. It was that man. He was in heaven, but his body was untouched. Not touched by debris, not ripped up and shredded like everybody else was. Just came down with the building. God protected that body. He died. He went to heaven. But his body was untouched, and they got to do a memorial service. You can pull it up online and watch it. It's unbelievable. But do you know that as a child of God, in the midst of a crisis, you have authority above all authorities to bring people to Christ, or to speak whatever truth needs to be spoken into it, to give direction for it. And that's what Paul does. He takes charge of the situation because no one knew what was going on. You know, a crisis or a storm doesn't make a person. It shows what a person is really made of. And it also tends to bring forth those who can really lead without selfish motives. Paul is wholly trusting in the sovereignty of God and in the providence of God, and he knew as a prisoner of Christ that he was completely secure in the sovereignty and providence of God. So he takes charge over this captain, he takes charge over these rugged sailors, he takes charge over the Roman guards and the Roman commander, and now in the midst of a storm, he's undismayed confidence in God is untouchable. He just stands there. He's got complete confidence in God in the midst of this storm. And what's he do? The first thing he does, he shares God's promise with them. Men, listen. Keep up your courage, he says, because there'll be no loss of life here, because I believe what God has promised me. I serve him. I belong to him. I believe what he said. And he brings them right to that point. Then he warns them to trust on God's promise to them. They're like about 14 days, maybe 500 miles out of Crete. There's some sailors, we're going to read it, they try to jump ship, they try to get out. He's warning them, don't jump ship. If you jump ship, we're not going to make it. You stay together. He sets before them, well, we'll read it in verse 23. For this very night an angel of the Lord, we read that, verse 27. But when the 14th night came, as we were being driven about in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors began to surmise that they were approaching some land. So they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. It's about 120 feet. A little farther, they took another sounding, found it to be 15 fathoms. That's about 90 feet. Fearing that we might run aground somewhere on the rocks, they cast 4 anchors from the stern and wished for daybreak. So they'd toss 4 anchors out of one side of the ship and let the current turn them so the sail would be always in the wind so they wouldn't flip over. And they just prayed to God for daybreak. And maybe at daybreak the light will shine and we can see something instead of just floating around in the dark in a storm. But as the sailors were trying to escape from the ship, they had let down the ship's boat into the sea on the pretense of intending to lay out anchors from the bow. Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, unless these men remain in the ship, you and yourselves cannot be saved. So the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it fall away. Until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have been constantly watching and going without eating, having taken nothing. Therefore I encourage you to take some food, for this is for your preservation, for not a hair of your head of any of you shall perish. And having said this, he took bread, giving thanks to God in the presence of all, and he broke it and he ate it. And all of them were encouraged, and they themselves took food. And all of us in the ship were 276 persons. And when they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing the wheat out into the sea. When the day came, they could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach, and they resolved to drive the ship into it if they could. And casting off the anchors, and left them in the sea, while at the same time they were loosening the ropes of the rudders and hoisting foresail to the wind. They were headed for the beach, but striking a reef where the 2 seas met, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. But the stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first to get to the land, and the rest should follow, some on planks, others on various things from the ship. And so it happened that they were all brought safely to land. So what we have here is this: Paul takes charge in an amazing way. First thing he does, it's a crisis. He's got an assurance that God is in control, and he stands up and he says, men, I believe God, and I believe his promise for us. And he brings them right to that point. Then he warns them to trust in God's promise. Get back in the ship. Tell that centurion, cut that ship away. If they leave, no one will live. So he has an authority now. They listen to him. They cut the ropes away. And the men stay on the ship. Then he set before them a good example. In the midst of this storm, he's encouraging them, you need to eat, you need to eat, you need to eat for your own preservation. You need to eat. So what's he do? He takes bread, he breaks it, he gives thanks to God, he passes it out. They all begin to take in nourishment, and they're like, man, we need food. You can tell that they need it. So he sets before them this example. In the midst of the storm, they became encouraged, they began to eat. And what does he do? He sees them safely through to land. In the midst of this storm, Paul doesn't find a cave to leap into or an ocean to swim away in, saving his own neck. He led by example what it means to trust God's sovereignty, God's providence, and God's promise. And you know what? They all followed him to shore. Amazing. Time to jump. Let's go. And now they're following him. So when you look at this chapter, and it's a strong chapter, I labeled it Storms Will Come. Because in Christian lives, storms will come. This chapter teaches us as we serve God, storms will come. Don't be afraid of them. Face them headlong. Look past them to the sender of the storm and find out what He's got for you in it. Storms often come. Sometimes we bring storms on ourselves because of sin. Sometimes they come from the hand of God. But all storms will teach us to trust Him no matter what. Storms have a way of revealing our inner character, and they're designed by God to help us change. How is my faith proven? If it's not by a storm. They will design and direct and mold me into the image of Christ. And even the worst storms. Listen, some of you have had tragedy in your life. Some of you have had great difficulty, pain, great suffering. The storms, the worst storm of life cannot change or redirect the will of God in your life. Nor can it hide from His face or hinder His purpose for you. Know that. That storm is there. It's by His hand. He'll see you through, even if you brought it on yourself. Storms will always give us the opportunity to serve others in the midst of our worst circumstances and bear witness to the grace of God through Jesus Christ our Lord. An amazing thing. I'm going to read this to you. I know we're running a little late. In Philippians chapter 1, now this is chapter 27, right? Next week's chapter 28, and it's the end of the book of Acts. When we get to the end of 28 next week, Paul still has not written Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 2 Timothy. Those books still have to be written, and they're written after Acts 28 at some time. So Paul pens this in Philippians chapter 1. He says, "Now I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel." As I've been through, I understand now. I look back on my life and all that I've faced and the great storms that God has allowed in my life, and I can tell you with an assurance that it has all worked out for the greater advance of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if He can pen that in His life, we can pen that in ours. We can understand that whatever we face, we can trust God in the midst of any storm, and we can give God's counsel in the midst of it, God's encouragement, which will always lead others to the safety of God's mighty hand. We can understand that. Lord, You're in charge of my life. You're here to see me through, and You're going to do that. And so storms will come. Don't be afraid of them. Face them headlong. Look to your Lord. Trust in Him, and He'll see you through, and He'll see others around you through in His perfect timing. Don't get ahead of Him in it. Amen? Amen. Let's pray. Father, thank You for this time that You've given us to walk through Your Word. And Lord, in many of our lives, there's storms brewing right now in many hearts here. I pray, Lord, that in the midst of the storm, You'd give every person in this fellowship eyes to see You, eyes to look past the peace of Christ that surpasses understanding, to look beyond, Lord, into Your hands and to Your eyes, and to know that You're completely in charge. Accomplish Your purpose. Mold us into the image of Your Son for Your glory in this valley, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
From New York, this is Democracy Now!
MBS was shocked by all of the anger over the killing of one journalist. According to the Wall Street Journal, on a phone call with Jared Kushner, MBS asked, why the outrage? And frankly, MBS's confusion is completely understandable. He's been getting away with autocratic like this for years with almost no blowback from the international community.
Netflix is under fire for pulling an episode of U.S. comedian Hassan Minhaj's show Patriot Act in Saudi Arabia at the kingdom's request. The show took aim at Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for the brutal killing and dismemberment of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. We speak with Human Rights Watch and the Committee to Protect Journalists, which ranks Saudi Arabia the third most censored country in the world. Then, a remarkable documentary just shortlisted for the Oscars takes us inside the life of Nadia Murad, the Yazidi Kurdish human rights activist from Iraq who was awarded the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize for her heroic activism after escaping sex slavery at the hands of the Islamic State. It's called On Her Shoulders.
Ms. Nadia Murad. Witnesses, Ms. Nadia Murad.
I now give the floor to Ms. Nadia Murad Basi Taha.
I beg you to put humans first. This life was not only created for you and your families. We also want life, and it's our right to live it.
We'll speak with the film's director, Alexandria Bombach, who was at the Nobel ceremony. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Democrats will take control over the House of Representatives as new members are sworn in today. Democrats picked up 40 seats in the November election, while in the Senate, Republicans expanded their majority slightly to 53. Over 100 women will serve in the House for the first time in U.S. history, including the first 2 Native American women, the first 2 Latino women from Texas, and the first 2 Muslim women. Palestinian-American Rashida Tlaib of Michigan will be sworn in the Quran that once belonged to Thomas Jefferson. She plans to wear a thobe, a traditional Palestinian gown, to the ceremony. Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York is now the youngest woman ever to serve in Congress. One congressional seat that will not be filled today is North Carolina's 9th District. Republican Mark Harris was initially believed to be the winner of that race against Democrat Dan McCready, but the results were not certified amidst allegations of Republican voter fraud. With their new majority, Democrats now have the ability to subpoena the administration and are expected to launch investigations into President Trump and his administration. Meanwhile, some House progressives are objecting to a proposed rule change backed by incoming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, known as PAYGO, which requires Congress offset any new spending with either tax increases or cuts to other programs. Some lawmakers have called the rule a conservative austerity measure that'll hamper their efforts to pass progressive legislation. Congressman Jim McGovern, the incoming chair of the House Rules Committee, has promised he won't allow PAYGO to derail progressive causes like Medicare for all. The partial government shutdown enters its 13th day as the impasse over Trump's demand for $5 billion in border wall funding shows little signs of progress. Democratic leaders said Wednesday they had a plan for reopening the government while creating a 30-day period for further negotiations on border security. Incoming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the plan does not include border wall funding. Trump reportedly told Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer that he would look foolish if he agreed to the deal. This is Speaker Pelosi speaking to reporters in front of the White House yesterday.
Tomorrow we will bring to the floor legislation which will open up government. It will be based on actions taken by the Republican Senate. Bills that have passed on the floor of the Senate by over 90 votes and or in committee unanimously, led by Senator Mitch McConnell. Our question to the president and to the Republicans is, why don't you accept what you have already done to open up government, and that enables us to have 30 days to negotiate for border security.
People have been sharing the effects of the shutdown on their lives using the hashtag #ShutdownStories. Testimonies range from the inability to pay bills, rent, to purchasing essential medicines and even food. Meanwhile, Native American communities are also feeling the effects of the government shutdown, as a disproportionate number rely on federally funded services, including for health care and food. Many Native Americans are also employed by the government. In the Southwest United States, some members of the Navajo Nation have been stuck at home, unable to drive to get to groceries and other essentials as roads are not being cleared of snow. Overall, nearly 1 million workers are working without pay or are furloughed. At his first cabinet meeting of 2019, President Trump opined on a myriad of issues ranging from border wall funding to his recently departed Defense Secretary James Mattis. Trump suggested he fired Mattis, even though Mattis publicly announced he was resigning after disagreeing with Trump's foreign policy. Speaking on North Korea, Trump said he received a great letter from Kim Jong-un and looked forward to a follow-up meeting following their historic June summit in Singapore.
Established a very good relationship with North Korea. That was going to be a war. That could have been a World War III, to be honest with you, because that would have, a lot of people would have had to get involved in that all over Asia, and then it spreads beyond Asia. And instead, we have somebody that I really think wants to get onto economic development and making a lot of success and money, frankly, for his country.
Asserted if he were not president, a war would have broken out on the Asian continent. He also expressed confidence North Korea was not testing nuclear weapons. It's unclear whether the Trump administration will agree to lift sanctions as demanded by North Korea before moving forward with negotiations. At the meeting, President Trump also addressed the ongoing trade war with China and the recent stock market turmoil.
The talk of the world, and we had a little glitch in the stock market last month, but it's still up, I guess, around 30% from the time I got elected, and it's going to go up once we settle trade issues, and once a couple of other things happen, it's going to go up. It's got a long way to go, tremendous amount to go. The trade deals we're making are fantastic for our country.
During the meeting, a poster featuring an image of Trump with the Game of Thrones-inspired phrase, "Sanctions are coming November 5th, was on display on the table in front of Trump. Trump initially tweeted the image on November 2nd as harsh economic sanctions against Iran were set to kick in following Trump's withdrawal from the 2015 Iran nuclear agreement. The original phrase from Game of Thrones is "Winter is coming" and references the character of Jon Snow, who in the show led a caravan of refugees through a border wall. In India, 2 women defied a centuries-old religious ban by entering the Sabrimala Hindu temple that had, until recently, been prohibited to women of reproductive age. A Supreme Court ruling in September overturned the ban, but Hindu nationalists, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi's BJP party, had opposed the ruling, and other attempts to enter the temple had been blocked. This is women's rights activist Trupti Desai, who herself was previously blocked from entering the temple.
The entry of women in Sabrimala today is an historic win for us. It is a victory of the movement of equality, and it is a victory of women power because after the verdict of the Supreme Court, the protesters were opposing the entry of women, and today that protest has become unsuccessful as the women have entered there.
The women's successful entry early Wednesday came hours after throngs of women took to the streets in Kerala to form a massive 385-mile human chain protesting gender inequality and in solidarity with women seeking to access the holy site. The action, organized by the leftist government coalition in Kerala, brought out over 1 million people, according to some estimates. In Mali, government officials have deployed armed forces after reporting 37 civilians were killed Tuesday by gunmen in central Mali. The victims of the attack are members of the Fulani community. Violence and tension between nomadic Fulani herders and Dogon farmers had been on the increase, reportedly sparked by land disputes. The Dogon have also accused the Fulani of ties to extremist groups. In Russia, the U.S. ambassador, former Utah Governor John Huntsman, visited a U.S. citizen who's accused by the Russians of espionage Entourage. Paul Whelan, who was arrested in Russia Friday, is a former Marine who now works for the auto parts supplier Borg-Warner. He was reportedly in Moscow attending a wedding. His family has said he's innocent of the espionage allegations. Some have speculated Whelan's arrest is retaliation for the arrest of the Russian gun rights activist Maria Butina, who in December pleaded guilty to conspiring to act as a Russian agent without registering with the Justice Department. Butina has been jailed since July after being accused of trying to infiltrate the NRA and other right-wing groups in the lead-up to the 2016 election. China's space agency has released a photo from the lunar surface after its Chang'e 4 space probe became the first ever to land on the far side of the moon. The mission could reveal important clues about the formation of both the Earth and its satellite and advances China's goal of landing humans on the moon in the 2020s. In more space news, NASA's New Horizons mission has sent back its first photo from Ultima Thule, the most distant object ever visited by a space probe. The icy asteroid is composed of two spheres smashed together resembling a snowman. It's about 4 billion miles from Earth in a ring of debris known as the Kuiper Belt, left over from the solar system's formation. The National Rifle Association suing the state of Washington after a new law banning the sale of semi-automatic assault rifles to anyone under the age of 21 went into effect January 1st. The law is part of a package of new gun control regulations approved by Washington state residents in November. In media news, longtime NBC reporter and analyst William Arkin has left the network and wrote a scathing memo on his way out. In the memo, Arkin condemns the media's reporting on U.S. wars and says he's not interested in taking part in the Trump circus. He writes, quote, "I find it disheartening that we do not report the failures of the generals and national security leaders. I find it shocking we essentially condone continued American bumbling in the Middle East and now Africa through our ho-hum reporting." Arkin goes on to write about the network's coverage of the Trump administration. Of course, Trump is an ignorant and incompetent imposter, and yet I'm alarmed at how quick NBC is to mechanically argue the contrary, to be in favor of policies that just spell more conflict and more war, Arkin wrote. You can see our past interviews with William Arkin at our website, democracynow.org. And in New York City, 11 activists who are currently fasting to protest the ongoing U.S.-backed Saudi-led war on Yemen were arrested yesterday for blocking the entrances to the U.S. mission to the United Nations. Protesters who were standing quietly with banners were charged with disorderly conduct before being released. They enter their 6th day of fasting today, with planned actions in front of the United Arab Emirates, French and British missions to the UN. On Friday, they'll protest in front of Lockheed Martin's New York City offices. This is Kathy Kelly of Voices for Creative Nonviolence speaking before her arrest yesterday.
We're a group of people with a deep and abiding concern about the United States policies, especially as they enact them in the United Nations, failing to save the lives of 87,500 children who already starved.
See all our interviews with Kathy Kelly, including our November interview about the Saudi and U.S. role in Yemen. Go to our website at democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Netflix is under fire for pulling an episode of U.S. comedian Hassan Minhaj's show Patriot Act from Saudi Arabia after officials from the kingdom complained to the streaming company that it violated Saudi cybercrime laws. The episode was posted in late October, a few weeks after Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi's murder in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Hassan Minhaj sharply criticized the Saudi royal family and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Just a few months ago, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, a.k.a. MBS, was hailed as the reformer the Arab world needed. But the revelations about Khashoggi's killing have shattered that image. And it blows my mind that it took the killing of a Washington Post journalist for everyone to go, oh, I guess he's really not a reformer. Meanwhile, every Muslim person you know was like, yeah, no, he's the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. So now would be a good time to reassess our relationship with Saudi Arabia. And I mean that as a Muslim and as an American. MBS was shocked by all of the anger over the killing of one journalist. According to the Wall Street Journal, on a phone call with Jared Kushner, MBS asked, why the outrage? And frankly, MBS's confusion is completely understandable. He has been getting away with autocratic shit like this for years with almost no blowback from the international community.
In the 18-minute episode, Minhaj slams the Saudi regime and the Crown Prince for the kingdom's persecution of women and human rights activists and its ongoing war in Yemen. He also calls out the long-standing relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States and skewers the Western portrayal of the Crown Prince as a modern reformer.
The censored episode has been viewed more than 1.6 million times on YouTube, where it remains available to viewers in Saudi Arabia. On Wednesday, Hassan Minhaj tweeted, "Clearly the best way to stop people from watching something is to ban it, make it trend online, then leave it up on YouTube. Let's not forget that the world's largest humanitarian crisis is happening in Yemen right now. Please donate to rescue.org/Yemen. He wrote. Democracy Now! Invited Netflix to join us on the show, but it declined our request. A spokesperson said, quote, "We strongly support artistic freedom worldwide and removed this episode only in Saudi Arabia after we had received a valid legal demand from the government and to comply with local law," unquote. Well, for more, we're joined by two guests. In Washington, D.C., Courtney Radge is with us, Advocacy Director at the Committee to Protect Journalists. And via Democracy Now! Video stream, we're joined by Sarah Lee Whitson, Executive Director of Human Rights Watch's Middle East and North Africa Division. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Courtney, let's begin with you. Talk about the significance, what you understand at this point, why Netflix pulled this Minhaj episode.
The understanding is they're saying that they were complying with local laws. The laws in Saudi Arabia are extremely repressive. They have a very restrictive cybercrime law that imposes fines of millions of riyals and jail sentences of up to 5 years for contradicting those statutes. And among the statutes of this law include things like publishing material online that contravenes public morals or insults the king, etc. So I think that what we're seeing is Netflix saying that it complies with local laws, but these local laws are completely out of touch with, obviously, with the First Amendment and with the rights of users in one of the world's most censored and restrictive countries to get information. And I think it's relevant and interesting to see that Netflix specifically talked about artistic freedom, which is very important, but this is also about press freedom and the freedom to get information.
So Sarah Lee Whitson, can you respond to that and the fact that Netflix said that it was complying with local law, and where else you're aware that this happens? I mean, is it very extraordinary that Netflix made this decision in Saudi Arabia?
In terms of other precedents, where we see this most often is with newspapers that have print editions in countries where material is sometimes censored preemptively in compliance with what people believe to be local laws. But in those cases, the newspapers will usually claim that it's the local publisher that's doing the censoring and not themselves. Obviously, we have issues with Google's censoring of search engines in China, and that's something that we have condemned and complained about. But I don't know of another instance, there may well be others, of a broadcaster censoring an episode of a TV show in the country because of a specific request from the country's government. So it does seem like an expansion of the slippery slope of content that's deemed unacceptable. And I think this was a big mistake.
Sarah,